Professor John Lobell has taught various architecture courses at Pratt, including History of Architecture, Architectural Theory, among several others. Having been with Pratt since 1969, Professor Lobell has been a pillar in the department. He truly is. And I would say a pillar in the Institute. He and his colleagues are responsible for shaping the future of architecture and making our program one of the top programs in the country, number 8, I might say, in the nation. At this learning salon, Professor of Architecture John Lobell will explore how creativity molds the future, the focus of his newly published book, Visionary Creativity, How New Worlds Are Born. Ladies and gentlemen, will you please join me in welcoming the distinguished Professor John Lobell.
Thank you, I'm flattered. Let's see if I get a screen here, great. And wow, lots of old friends and students from decades ago. Some of the students in the past 10, 20 years have had top positions at firms all over the world, but in particular SOM, and they were working on this very elaborate, parametric software for the New World Trade Center. And so, yeah, my students are working at SOM. And their boss was this silver-haired partner at SOM. He was one of my students also. So you can tell you're getting older. So I've long been interested in creativity, and I've read a lot of the books. And as I began to get focused, I was going to write this book on creativity. I pretty much got all the books and read a lot of them, particularly if they had an audio version. Then I could listen in the car. And they're almost all about neurophysiology and synapses and neurotransmitters and parts of the brain with big Latin names. And so finally, I have a passage in my book where I quote some of that stuff, and with these Latin names for medulla oblongata or whatever that stuff is. Has this ever helped anyone design a building or make a movie or write a book? And here I am teaching architecture, and I have the privilege of teaching a survey of history of architecture. And I don't know everything. So I'm usually with a team of 5 people per semester, maybe 10 of us in all, doing the 2-year sequence. So I'm sitting there listening to my younger colleagues' lectures, and they really know this stuff. I'm just learning and learning this. And does anybody writing books about creativity know this stuff? Know what Piranesi was doing, know what Palladio was doing, know what Michelangelo was doing. And I do, because I've been listening to my brilliant young colleagues talk about this stuff. And also I had the good fortune, I realized over the years, I spent years with Joseph Campbell, and he chose me to be one of the advisors for his foundation. I studied Tai Chi with Chin-Ming Chang, studied Buddhism with Trungpa Rinpoche. And these are like, the leading creative figures of the 20th century. Studied city planning with Edmund Bacon, architecture with Louis Kahn and Robert Venturi. So maybe I figured I'd gotten old enough that I could put some of this down on paper. Whoops, sorry about that. So that's my book. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by just showing us a couple slides. There are no images in the book, but I like to think with images. Where'd my laser pointer go? Oh, here it is. We're in this revolutionary technological period where this thing costs $2. comes from China directly. Takes a month to get it, but it's just stuff, jeans, $2. So it's this radically changing world. Anyway, so I'm going to show a few slides and then do some reading. So first, just a little bit about me for those of my students from 40 years ago, not up to date. Studied architecture at the University of Pennsylvania, worked with some interesting architects. Ulrich Franzen is one of them on a project for the future of the city. One of the things we're working on was you touch a telephone pole and zoom, a taxi shows up. Who knew it was going to be your cell phone? But we were working on that in the 60s. I consult on a biotech project called Timeship. You can find out more at timeship.org or talk to the person who runs, the architect who's running the project. He's right here. Did sculpture at the Architectural League, did a book on Louis Kahn. I teach at Pratt, consult with a company called Milgo on doing sculpture for leading sculptors, and you can find out more at johnlobell.com. So that's me. And I can summarize my book in 2 sentences. Visionary creatives swim in the culture of their day and manifest in their work the spirit of their age. The things they create in art, design, science, technology, business embody that spirit and at the same time restructure our consciousness and pull us into the future. So to start at the very beginning, creativity makes no sense except in a cultural context. I have not seen a single book on creativity that recognizes there's such a thing as culture. And that different parts of the world have different cultures, and cultures change over history. And so we're not the same people we were 100 years ago, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, or in one part of the globe or another. So that's step one that no book I've seen before recognizes. And then spirit of the age. Well, you can't, no psychologist can use that term in a paper that they're going to get published. Spirit of the age. What is spirit, So these are things that we are immersed in. They're just not permitted in the fields that think they know what creativity is. Psychology, sociology, and neurophysiology. So, and in addition, there's a dialogue between ourselves and our culture. We make our culture makes us, and creatives are the people who are immersed in the culture and then also drive it forward. I'll talk a little bit more about that. So let's just do a little art history type stuff and just take a very quick look at 4 periods. So here's Michelangelo's David, and the point is, this is beginnings of our modern notion of a human being. There's a body and a mind and a spirit. And so there's an inner psychology there. There's something going on in that mind. There's a lot of anatomy here. You go 200 years earlier in sculpture that didn't have that anatomy. Only interest was in the immortal soul. So we begin with that, but then that takes place in a space that for the first time allows us to move about, as we see in this perspective by Leonardo da Vinci. And in Palladio's Villa Rotunda, sets the human being in the center. The Renaissance borrows from the Greeks the motto, man is the measure of all things, but you have to have a place to stand in order to measure. And then Giordano Bruno expands on Copernicus and imagines an infinite universe. That's what he got burnt at the stake for, saying that the universe was infinite and not finite. With the Baroque, suddenly the same figure, David, is now in the midst of hurling the stone at Goliath. So there's action, emotion, and in the architecture, the Bernini's colonnade reaches out and embraces the faithful in this active emotional state. No longer are the orbits of the planet circles, but ellipses, which are dynamic. They slow down as they go out and then speed up as they whip around the sun. And the shocking thing about that is they're not circles, they're not constant in motion, they're not perfect. They're no longer in the heavenly realm. That the earthly realm and the planetary realm are the same. If you had a big enough ladder, you could get there, and now we do. But just before that, they were totally different metaphysical system. And then look at I play some Renaissance music for my students, and then some Bach for this one. So this is the Annunciation, where the angel comes to Mary and says, "Guess what?" No reaction. There's no emotional dynamic in the early Renaissance. But here's the Assumption of Mary going up to heaven. It's like everybody's out there, in this dynamic action. And then, not too much going on beyond the eyes in the Renaissance. But now, the layers of the sadness that Rembrandt has accumulated over the course of his life are revealed in this self-portrait. In post-impressionism, we all love, it's fun when you go to MoMA and you just see the crowd in front of this painting. Two paintings, this one and the Melting Watches, right? And they're next near each other, and that's where the crowds are, everybody listening to their talking sticks. But there are no objects here. Everything is churning dynamics, but that's the world. So we go to Faraday's electromagnetic fields. The whole universe is electromagnetic fields. Particles are just swirling vortices in the electromagnetic fields. And then with cubism, the observer is in motion, time is elastic, space is generated by objects, including ourselves. And rather than a chronological novel, there's a stream of consciousness that Joyce gives us with Leopold Bloom in Ulysses. So what would all this be like for us today? So let's just look quickly at three things going on in science. Quantum entanglement. So John Bell totally blew up all of physics, just invalidated everything Einstein had ever said in what's called Bell's theorem, and showing that when particles become entangled, they can be on two different sides of the universe. If you observe this one, you change that one. So what quantum entanglement tells us that particles potentially reflect each other across the universe. Every particle, every part of every one of us is reflected in every part of every other one of us. Existence is not made out of space, time, and matter, but relationships. Then Lynn Margulies in symbiogenesis, this is the number of genes we have. This is the number of genes that are in the bacteria in our body. We have 2 pounds of bacteria, about the size of our brains. They're just beginning to recognize the importance of it. We interact with that. We spread it all around. We're interchanging it all the time. And Lynn Margulies is able to show that's what drives evolution, not natural selection, not competition. Life did not take over the globe by combat, but by networking. And life forms that once seemed discrete are totally interconnected, continually exchanging DNA. And then genomics, that all of life can be made from some simple rules. Stephen Wolfram, who we're hoping to get to Pratt next semester, shows that he can generate a rich complexity of form with very simple rules, and suggests that maybe that's how our world works. He likes to say, I think when I find the code that generates our universe, it'll be about 6 lines. So 6 lines of code can make the whole thing. So what happens when you start thinking that way? There's this kid named David Karp. How many people know who that is? So he's down in the basement, and he's just playing with his computer. And he's at Bronx Science, and he's hating every minute of it. And his mother says, okay, you can drop out of school. He says, no, I can't. Just drop out of school. You're enjoying your computer. So he makes Tumblr, which is something that advances on Facebook, and sold it for $1 billion. Put $1 billion in his pocket. This high school dropout kid. And what was his insights? My contention is that he lives in a networked world. I can understand it. He lives it. And it's the people that are living in the emerging world that then they go nuts that why doesn't anybody else get it? And so they're driven to create things that will make it clear to everybody else, whether it's a business or a work of art or a technology. So what might we make of this networked world I just described in science? And I like to use this image of Sunday in the Park by Seurat. And from a distance, these figures look like neoclassical, discrete, like us figures. But you zoom in close, and they're all clusters of interconnected, fractal, computationally generating themselves particles. And I think that the exciting figures of the future will be the ones who recognize that and then embed that in their creativity. This book is an urgent call for creativity in ourselves, our economy, our society, and our culture. Western culture is built on creative freedom, but today that freedom is diminished in Europe and is under attack in the United States. As we will see in the course of this book, the loss of that creativity would pose threats to us on many levels. Individually, we can either be passive consumers or active creators. Economically, we can compete by lowering the cost of labor or by creating new technologies, goods, and services. Socially, we can live in the past or we can create the future. And most importantly, culturally, we can keep alive in the West a moral and creative center in the heart of each individual, or we can surrender that role, that responsibility that resides in each of us. So you might wonder, why would creativity be under attack? Isn't creativity an unquestioned good? But as we will see in this book, a particular form of creativity that I am calling visionary creativity can be a serious challenge to the status quo. It has the potential to bring forth new worlds, but then what happens? In doing so, it also destroys old worlds. Those who remain attached to old worlds are not interested in seeing them destroyed. Just look at the yellow taxi cab industry. They're doing everything they can to crush Uber. God forbid that people should actually be able to push a button to get a taxi. Visionary creatives feel that our world is no longer what we had thought it to be, and that a new world is struggling to be born. So these are people who are living in this new world that us old people might know about, but we're not living it the way they are. And they go nuts that why is it that nobody gets it? And they're driven then to create things, whether it's art or businesses or technologies, that will help others experience what they're experiencing. Their audiences on encountering their work are changed, and they enter new worlds. It's central to my idea that there's such a thing as culture, that different cultures are different. And if you don't identify the culture that you're talking about, everything you say about creativity doesn't make any sense. So I talk quite a bit about culture, and it's just something I want to read because it's just so cool. This is the one movie all my students know. So, as we stated earlier, it's difficult for us to see our own culture or even recognize the very concept of culture. We tend to see our world as real. Isn't this the way it is? Well, we're in space, right? Well, Greeks didn't think that way. They're pretty sophisticated. A totally different notion. The idea of making perspective, vanishing lines and locating, that's a Renaissance idea. That's not even us anymore. So on the cover of my book is Raphael's School of Athens, which I said some people anachronistically still live in. But that world's long gone. We tend to see our world as real rather than one of many possible systems of meanings. We live in fields of meanings. But over time and across the globe, not all people experience the world the same way. In acts of cognition, we process the impressions that come in through our senses, and the way we do this is different in different times and places. These differences define cultures. Now, culture is important because you think of what you can get. Louder?
You betcha. Please.
Move forward. So think of how much you can store in your hard drive. Where do you put the rest? In the cloud. You don't walk around with Wikipedia on your cell phone. You know, it's just, that's available. So culture is the cloud for ourselves. We store much of ourselves in our culture, particularly in our arts. Recall the end of Ridley Scott's science fiction movie, Blade Runner. It's a movie all my students know. They haven't heard of Gone with the Wind, but they all know Blade Runner. In the movie, androids are created to work off-planet, are forbidden to come to Earth, and are programmed to die in full health. The android, Roy Batty, played by Rutger Hauer, as he is dying, says, "I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. Attack ships on fire off the shoulders of Orion. I've watched C-beams glitter in the dark near the Tannhauser Gate. All these moments will be lost in time, like tears in the rain. Time to die." He releases a white dove that carries away his experiences as he dies. The androids have no cultural forms, no art or literature in which to store their memories. So culture is the place where we store ourselves. So now I have a large section of the book on creating an original self, how we create ourselves. And I'll just read one brief passage. There's, you know, at every graduation speech, students are told to follow their passion. I'm embarrassed to say that word exists one time in my book. I really made a point of avoiding that word. But some of the famous statements of that. In our culture, we have the difficult task of creating an original self. In his letters to a young poet, Rainier Maria Rilke writes, "There is only one way, go within. Search for the cause, find the impetus that bids you to write. Put it to this test. Does it stretch out its roots in the deepest place in your heart? Can you avow that you would die if you were forbidden to write? Dig deep into yourself for a true answer. And if it should ring its assent, if you can confidently meet this serious question with a simple 'I must,' then build your life on it. It has become your necessity. Your life, in even the most mundane and least significant hour, must become a sign, a testimony to this urge." And then I have quotes saying the same thing by James Joyce, Martha Graham, and Steve Jobs. This incredible Stanford graduation speech he gave. It's just this, just a resource you can keep going back to. Then I have a section on becoming, how do you become a visionary creative? And finding psychologists, neurophysiologists, and sociologists useless, I turn to a poetic philosopher. So Friedrich Nietzsche writes, "I will tell you of the three metamorphoses of the spirit, how the spirit becomes a camel, the camel a lion, and the lion then a child." So Nietzsche says, as a camel, you say, put a load on me. You study and take on your culture and your discipline. And then as a lion, the lion rushes out into the desert, and the camel becomes a lion, rushes out in the desert, and it has one task: to destroy a dragon whose name is Thou Shalt. And so all the masters that you have respected, studied with, learned, you now, do I really think they had it right? And if not, you have to destroy that and build your own. But even the lion can't do that. The child does that as a wheel rolling out of its own center. So art in particular and creativity in general imply originality, the bringing of something new into being. Yet paradoxically, art and creativity must always occur within existing traditions. You can't think of a single work of art that's not, and if it's not in a tradition, it's defying a tradition. So the tradition is still there. Each painting, each musical composition, each scientific theory, each chunk of software code calls up for us myriads of others and exists in relationship to them. So you begin by mastering existing traditions. You see that, but then we see that many who break rules to forge new forms were fully the masters of the traditions they smashed. Beethoven had mastered the Viennese Symphony of Haydn and Mozart before he launched Romanticism. Picasso had mastered classical painting by the time he dropped out of the academy at 16. Felonious Monk worked with the jazz greats of his day, from Dizzy Gillespie to Miles Davis, in the creation of bebop before entering his own world. Robert Venturi outraged the architectural world with his attacks on orthodox modernism in his book Complexity and Contradiction. But then when you look at what he says, he understands the modern masters better than his critics do. So we have to start by mastering our discipline. Talk about schools, which I'm against. Teachers, which I'm for. So in school, you bring your work to the studio. Your classmates admire it. Your teachers work with you. Take it apart. Analyze your intentions. Identify your strengths. Find weaknesses and help you move forward with a deeper understanding. Then you enter your discipline and you no longer are with your teachers, but you still hear their voices. Eventually, their voices fade and you hear your own words. You take your work apart, analyze your intentions, identify your strengths, find weaknesses, and move forward with a deeper understanding on your own. One more thing. I'm just going to mention something, and then I'll finish up with Van Gogh. And what I want to mention is my wife, Alyssa. Where is she? Has a totally different take on the movie La Dolce Vita than I do. So that led me to think, how do we judge works of art? And how do we react to La Dolce Vita? How do we evaluate it? On one level, we can admire its cinematography, storytelling, portrayals of characters, cityscapes of Rome, impeccable clothing. I mean, there's this clothes from 50 years ago would look spot on today. But then you might ask, what is my reaction to this movie? And that'll depend on who you are. Are you a man or a woman? And how old were you when you first saw the movie? Did you see it in 1960 when it was a year old, portraying a living world that you wanted to be part of? Or are you seeing it today when it's talking about a world from 50 years ago? You're going to have a totally different reaction to it. So we look at, art changes by the way we perceive it.
Question.
Yeah.
Do you think there are any movies or pieces of art which are truly timeless? Wherever you do it at, it's as real as it was when it was made?
What do you think? What would you think as an example?
I think there are certain transcendent qualities of whether it's music or movies or art, which at any time frame when you watch it, it's just it evokes a soul or a mastery or something that transcends through generations, just as freshly as when it was made.
Well, if you look at the Viennese Classical Symphony, Haydn and Mozart, there's a whole way that those things are structured. You put forward a theme, you put forward a counter theme. They have ways that they interact. For people who are not familiar with that, who have never heard of that, they're just going to hear a jumble, I think.
Okay, what if you hear like a Sam Cooke song back in the 60s, and that soul reverberates through the same listener 20, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years from then on? That chill that you get when you first heard it, still gotten 50 years later by a new listener.
Ask some of your young play it for some of your young friends,
Okay.
and let us know.
All right, I'll let you.
Yeah, I don't know.
How about Handel's Messiah?
I don't think it's going to make any sense to people who are not familiar with the tradition that it's in and reacting to.
how about an animated film like Snow White?
Why don't they make films like that now if it's so works so well? Why do they make those stupid 3D things?
Because Snow White doesn't have shadows.
Pardon?
Snow White doesn't have shadows. She doesn't have dimension, apparently.
Right. Yeah.
I think we're getting lost in the object, because it's not really the object that's the point, it's how we perceive it. So,
Well, that's my argument,
Yeah.
but not everybody's going to agree.
well, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, so how we are is how we see the world. So if we're not expanded in our awareness, we won't see the fullness of things. Doesn't matter what's created.
Right. Any other thoughts about other universals? So let me just abbreviate how I was going to wrap up, and then we'll have some more discussion. And after looking at the things that are creative, are created, I look at the people who create them. So why would you do this? And I think about people ask me, can they read this book? Can you read this book and become creative? Is people going to find this useful? And I don't know. I'm an intellectual. What do I know? But I think about people as generally falling into several groups or combinations thereof. People are there are leaders who organize, motivate, and command. There are nurturers who care for others. There are producers who make things, actives who seek physical challenges. Another part of the book I go into detail. Actives would be smoke jumpers, mountain climbers, special forces. Mystics who experience transcendence, and somnambulists who are content with feelings of well-being. I'm picking on happiness studies. And visionary creatives who bringers of the new, destroyers of the old. All are worthy, all can lead rich lives. But this book is about visionary creatives and for those who seek to encourage them. So I end with looking at several figures, Pope, Beethoven, Nietzsche, Solzhenitsyn, and Van Gogh. What difficult lives. And did they care that their lives were difficult? Was that what was important? So Jose Ortega y Gasset writes, the political or cultural aspects of history are the mere surface of history. What is preference to and deeper than these? The reality of history lies in biological power, the pure vitality in what is in man of cosmic energy, not identical with, but related to the energy which agitates the sea, fecundates the beast, causes the tree to flower, and the star to shine. And Joseph Campbell writes, myth is the secret opening through which the inexhaustible energies of the cosmos pour into cultural manifestation. So my argument is visionary creatives are those who experience those energies. So poor Van Gogh, he starts out with being rejected by this woman and then being fired from his relative's art gallery because he's telling the customers the art is junk. And but now let's look at this in a little bit of depth. So Doctor Who is a long-running British television science fiction series about a Time Lord, Doctor Who travels through time in a phone booth. But it's real big inside. In an episode titled Vincent and the Doctor, regarded as one of the best in the series, the Doctor and his companion Amy traveled to Provence in the south of France in 1890 to enlist Van Gogh's aid in fighting a space monster. They form an affection for Van Gogh. In an attempt to relieve him of his despair, take him to our present to see an exhibit of his work in Paris. Van Gogh is overwhelmed by the enthusiastic reception for his paintings. Then within earshot of Van Gogh, Doctor Who asked the exhibit's curator, where do you think Van Gogh's rates in the history of art? The curator, played with British solemnity by Bill Nighy, replies, well, big question, but to me, Van Gogh is the finest painter of them all. Certainly the most popular great painter of all time, the most beloved. His command of color, the most magnificent. He transformed the pain of his tormented life into ecstatic beauty. Pain is easy to portray, but to use your passions in pain to portray the ecstasy and joy and magnificence of the world, no one had ever done that before. Perhaps no one will ever do it again. To my mind, that strange wild man who roamed the fields in Provence was not only the world's greatest artist, but also one of the greatest men who ever lived. All that within the earshot of Van Gogh. Van Gogh never heard words like that. And of course, it would have been wonderful if he had. But did he need to hear it? He wrote to his brother Theo, wings, wings to fly above life, wings to fly above the grave and death. That is what we want, and I am beginning to understand that we can get them. We see from Van Gogh's letters that his greatest despair was not his misfortunes, but his inability to fully convey in his paintings the luminous world he experienced. As much as we admire what he accomplished, he wanted to accomplish so much more. And then one more passage. How many people saw the Alexander McQueen exhibit at the Met? Okay, so toward the end of the exhibit is this big quote on the wall. This is the birth of a new dawn. There is no way back for me now. I'm going to take you on journeys you've never dreamed were possible. Thank you. Thank you. Now back to questions. Charles. Charles is a colleague of mine from a Buddhist study group from 30 years ago.
And we just re-met a week ago.
We just had a reunion.
At the moment, I'm enthralled by what the Calatrava downtown does to that site. I would like to hear what questions you might have about all of
I think we all have to. Okay, he's asking about the Calatrava transportation terminal in Lower Manhattan at the World Trade Center. And I would say Calatrava is my favorite architect right now. And I'm going to have to wait to walk around it. The New York Times wrote a very negative review about a month ago, the reviewer saying, I was all enthusiastic about it, but now when you see it crammed in, between these buildings, it's not what I had thought it was going to be. So we'll have to wait and see. But Calatrava, because of his working with the forces that are in the architecture, I think, and having this very powerful aesthetic to do it within, is our most remarkable architect right now. Yeah?
Is there any literature or reasoning as to how Van Gogh couldn't settle painting during his lifetime and is now, one of the most revered artists of all time? Is there any about the progression of how that even happened? Because I've always wondered. He's a failure when he died. No one cares about his art, and now it's worth $120 million.
Yeah, when you look at it in more detail, it's more complicated than that. First of all, he was a very difficult person, so that didn't help. But just about a month before he died, there was an exhibit in Paris. The leading artists of the day all lauded him. If he had lived 10 more years, I think he would have been very successful. So it was a matter of timing. Jerry.
You mentioned that you study Tai Chi and that you study Buddhism with Rinpoche. And what I'm wondering about is, in what way does that inform you in terms of everything you're talking about? What do Tai Chi and Buddhism give you in terms of this kind of thinking, etc.?
Yeah, thank you. So I teach a course in non-Western architecture where we go in this in a lot of detail. So, and there's a little bit of this in my book, but not too much, that looking at these different cultures. So if you look at a map of Eurasia, let's start with China, that I come from a school of thought from Oswald Spengler that a culture begins by laying down its temple form and its epic poem. And the epic poem outlines the moral structure of that culture and its people. And the temple form, the spaces in which they'll be able to move. So the Greek temple does not have an interior that's used. It's just for offerings. It's an object in space, but it's not really in space, it's just an object. So you can look at a Greek vase at the Met, and when you have figures running, if one arm is in front of another, it gets awkward, because that means this arm is further back in space, and it doesn't work for them. So from that point of view, in China, the notion is that we should put ourselves in accord with the flow of nature, or the flow of all things. The Tao is all things. And so the Chinese temple is open for the air to move through it. And so Tai Chi is a study of Taoist philosophy with your body, putting your body in accord with these natural flows. And then as a combative martial art, and I like to do this with my students, so you do push hands, and then if you feel resistance, it's in you, because if you just throw them into the wall. So instead of working against the flow of things, you work with them. In India, Buddhism, this world is an illusion. The point is to identify with the transcendent oneness of a transcendent world that is the real world, instead of getting all caught up in these illusory material things. And so that I look at these different disciplines as a way to understand different cultures, and then you get to the West and you look at the Arthurian romances. So in Percival, there's this, Percival's a long story, so a shorter one, the knights are at the round table, and the Holy Grail appears veiled. One of the knights says, I propose we take a vow to go on a quest to view the Grail unveiled before we eat this supper. They all agree. And then they each entered the forest in a different place where there was no path nor way. Because if it's a path, it's somebody else's path. That's the Western requirement of the moral center, moral and creative center being the heart of each individual. So that when my late wife Mimi did a Tibetan cultural center in Manhattan, our monk friends, Lobell and a couple of his buddies, came in their robes to be on the review, and they show up at school and wow, who are they? And they're there and everything. And he's a very famous sand painter. He's the most important sand painter. So I'm driving them back to the city, and Lobell says, every student does their own project? Well, yeah, you'd copy somebody, you fail. But not in his culture. He wouldn't wing it in the sand painting. They're all prescribed. Maybe a theologian might be able to make a modification, but the artist doesn't. So to me, these are they all enrich us, but they also become ways of understanding these other cultures. There was a big thing in the 60s to say, we got to understand all these other cultures because we don't have one. I think we do. And I think we're in danger of losing it, and it's time for people to wake up that the Enlightenment that recognized the individual human being, thank you, no one else had ever had that idea before. And people think today, if we do away with the West, we'll all be free and wonderful, and we won't have the bully United States going around bombing people. No, if you do away with the West, you're going to have tyranny, which is what we had for the past 10,000 years in every culture before the Enlightenment. And so I think each of these gives us insight into the range of human possibilities. Other questions? So everybody's clear on creativity, all ready for the exam. Okay, so one more back here. This is Yvonne, who is a colleague of mine from Pratt, and works at NYU and runs his own online university where I've had the good fortune to be able to teach a course on Frank Lloyd Wright. So you can actually take my course on Yvonne's online university.
Thank you, John. And maybe this is the point to announce that we'll be doing a course on visual creativity.
Oh, yeah.
Visionary creativity, yes. So
We're
that's one of
going
the
to do a whole
reasons.
course on this, so you'll be able to take it for free. We'll go into much more depth.
So I hope you enjoyed the presentation tonight. This is just the beginning, the introduction to what the course will be. So John, you spoke about the visionary creatives until now, and you gave some examples. Can you talk about the future visionary creatives and the visionary creatives that the world needs today?
There's an interesting thought that I think that visionary creatives absorb energies from the cosmos. And this is a concept that's not present in psychology or neurophysiology or whatever. But it's a real mistake to think we can tell the cosmos what to do. We want to, sort of find out first what it wants to do. And so I think that we're in a time of realizing our generative networked quality. And if we look, I think we've moved from art to technology and business. Spengler says in the late periods of a culture, business and technology become important instead of art. And that if we look at the technologies we're all talking about, they're all about networking. They're all about this interconnectedness. Some of it is trivial. If you have students who want to know who's going to be at the party and they're stuck at their cell phone all the time. But on the other hand, tap into Wikipedia or whatever. So I think the people who are experiencing that network computational flow are the ones that are going to bring us new creative visions. Yeah.
The elephant in the room is the fact that we're here at Pratt, and the question is, this idea of creative visionaries, is it something Pratt and higher education today is on board for, or are we running antithetical to that because of the emphasis on content and career rather than personal development?
Oh, universities, are not interested in creativity. But it's possible for a few subversives to exist. I've have had and continue to have a wonderful time at Pratt because Pratt was so disorganized and so not knowing what it was doing that it allowed people like me, and I won't name any of my colleagues because I'll leave some out, but there's easily a dozen of them who've just done, just able to get away with doing this really great stuff. And it's less and less now because we have these stricter and stricter accrediting rules about, where's your fire stairs? But so there have been some, but even though Pratt, is not an Ivy school and is a modest place with a small budget, I don't think I could have had a better career. And it's because of a lot of my colleagues and a lot of my students, some of whom are here. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
Beyond Calatrava, who is in your current pantheon in other fields right now of visionary creatives?
Stephen Wolfram. The great thing, when I was in junior high, I had this LP record, and it was a physicist, guy who did the hydrogen bomb, Edward Teller. And one side was theory of relativity, and the other side was the size of the universe. And I listened to it over and over. It's all I had. every TED Talk is on YouTube. Yeah, everybody I'm interested in. I go to, like Stephen Wolfram, I simply go to YouTube and I go filter 1 month and see if there's anything new. Whoops, he just gave a talk last week. Let's see what he's up to. And so anybody we're interested in, we can like hunt down and then, follow them. Yeah.
Do you think there becomes a point at which there's so much data out there that it's detrimental, that no one remembers anything really anymore, no one thinks it matters as much anymore because there's so much of it out there that there's not enough eyeballs or minds to even sift through it, and that everyone is just 5-second attention span, next video, next song, next whatever, and there's no treasure of it, of actually, just having a small amount of it as opposed to this vast amount that you can never go through.
I think that's definitely a problem. And okay, just a little fun survey. How many people have read a book in the past month? Oh my God. I haven't. I listen to them, but to actually sit there and read a book, I do a website called Cinema Discourse with a colleague named John David Ebert. And he's been writing books now, Star Wars, scene by scene, Apocalypse Now, scene by scene. And he's done about 5 or 6 of them, The Shining, a bunch of them. And he's a hyper genius. He just churns these out. So he'd done a review for my book for Amazon. So I said I'd review his Apocalypse Now book. A month later, he's written 3 more books. He says, Lobell, where's my review? I said, I haven't finished the book yet. So he can write them faster than I can read them. So, yeah, I think that's a real problem. And I think with this flood of internet stuff, maybe, hopefully, we just haven't figured out how to redo it. I used to go out and eyeball the newsstand whenever there's a new New York Review of Books, and if Susan Sontag was on the cover, I'd buy it. And now, about every once in a while, I'll subscribe to New York Review of Books, and it comes for a year, and I don't read a single one. So it's not like I'm unplugged. So I think it's just changing. And there's stuff that, I follow, I look for interesting people. Any other thoughts? Well, thank you, and there's snacks in the back, and if anybody wants, thank you. If anybody wants a book, there's a table over here where you can pick one up and then get it autographed.